present data analytics and data.
I'm trying to pull together some great content for us as a group. So really excited to reconvene. When we saw you last, we had Emily Kuhn speak about accessibility and dashboard design and visualization, which was a really cool talk. Today, we're going to give you some more info on a design framework to help motivate action from your end users. So really excited to share with you today. We have a great guest speaker. But first, I want to kind of kick us off. I want to land everybody new on our user group page. So if you're not familiar with us, you can always navigate to usergroups.tableau.com/Charlotte. This will, if it ever loads, it will give you our group overview, tell you about upcoming events, who our leaders are, give you some cool little links to other Tableau content around the web, as well as our community forum, our YouTube channel, and give you the direct means to contact us as a group. Once again, you're going to want to subscribe so that you automatically get notified when we have a new meeting coming up, as well as you'll get notifications around other content we're trying to push out to you. So happy to have you today for our October session. Just a heads up, the session will be recorded. If that is something that is problematic for you or your workplace, please do take the appropriate action, and you can consume the content later in an on-demand fashion if that's better for you. Just want to make sure everybody's aware that the content is being recorded as per usual so that we can post it to our YouTube channel. Again, happy to have you here. One more order of business before I pass it over to Lee to drop some knowledge on you. But I want to introduce you to a couple of new folks that we've had join our Charlotte Tableau User Group leadership team. It's a really long way of saying that. So as many of you know, Rashid had been with us for a couple of years now. He joined Tableau, so is no longer allowed to be an official lead of the group. So we realized that we could not replace Rashid with a single person. That became very obvious to William and I. So we reached out to Darrell initially, a long-term member of our group. He's agreed to step in and take on part of the load. And then most recently, Natalie has agreed to join us. They represent our two biggest banking customers in the region. So we have full coverage now. We have Darrell rep in Wells Fargo, Natalie rep in B of A. Natalie also leads our Alteryx user group for those of you who are interested in some of the crossover there here in Charlotte. And then Darrell's been a part of this group as long as I have. So really happy to have both him and Natalie join the leadership team. All right. Enough about us. Again, the page you can get to usergroups.tableau.com/Charlotte for all our information. Subscribe, keep up with us. Now the exciting part, I'm going to hand off to our special guest, Lee Feinberg. He's joining us to speak a little bit about his Persuade Quietly framework for visualization, developing dashboards that motivate action without shouting. So I am fascinated to hear more. Lee, we're so thankful that you agreed to join us today. One final order of business. Thank you to my wife for joining her first Tableau user group as well. She was very worried that I would call her out. Her name is Anna Poole. You can find her in the chat.
So she was rightly worried, because there you go. She
was rightly worried. I was threatened when I went downstairs to get water that I shouldn't introduce her. So prayers out for me. But Lee, thank you again for joining us. Really happy to have you and everybody else who's joined us today. It'll be great content.
Yeah, absolutely happy to be here. And yeah, it was good. I know I've known Emily for a long time, and actually she joined me on my YouTube channel. I guess it was last year already. And we spoke for about 30-40 minutes or so about her experience in analytics. And of course, since then she's changed, because now she's working down at she's working with Red Hat, but yeah, back in her, still hasn't moved.
Yeah. One last note for folks as Lee gets started. If you have questions, look for the Q&A link down here at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Pop them in the Q&A. Natalie, Darrell, and myself will be kind of curating that, framing it up for Lee while he's going through his presentation. The chat is open if there are things that you find funny and want to comment on, but we'll be kind of monitoring both channels for questions as they come in. All yours, Lee.
Beautiful. I'll pop this up. we'll get going. And I had talked to Jeremy and the team before, please put any questions. Actually, I'm going to go off video too, just to, you've seen me already, and I just want to make sure we've got really good bandwidth for all of this. But if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A, and where I can, I'm happy to answer those as we're going along. Otherwise, we'll catch them all at the end. We'll have plenty of time, and anything is fair game as far as I'm concerned. And certainly if I say anything that really catches your interest, either you agree or disagree, those are always great points to have a conversation about, because certainly when it comes to the work of data visualization, storytelling, there's really not too many things where there's a perfect right or wrong way to do something. So it's always a good way for people to learn and hear those different viewpoints. So I'm up in central New Jersey in a town called Westfield, and I didn't get to check the weather down by y'all today, but for us it's nice and sunny, and we still got some warm weather before it turns to fall tomorrow. So hoping to get a good bike ride in this afternoon while I still can do that outdoors. So here I am over here, and I just wanted to share something I'm proud of, that my daughter attends James Madison University, and last year, with everything going on with COVID, I volunteered to help them with their COVID dashboard. And the reason I'm bringing that up is probably something that you're dealing with, or if you're not, probably some of your colleagues are, is they had a lot of data, right? There's a lot of information flowing in about COVID, and they have a lot of different people that they were trying to communicate to. They have students, they have parents, they have donors, they have faculty, they have the government. There's a lot going on, but they didn't really think about the message and how they wanted to communicate it. It was, we have data, let's make a bunch of charts and get them up on a dashboard. And that's really the area that I want to get into today, is thinking about what it is you're trying to communicate, and then how do you do that, of course, in a visual way, which is what we're all interested in when it comes to Tableau. And I run a company called DecisionViz. It's just me, which I love. And what I focus on is in the area of data storytelling, and also a term that you may have heard more recently called data literacy. That's and how that applies to Tableau is an element of it. And really what we're out to do is help our clients build what we call an army of trustworthy decision makers, because that's really what this is all about. It's not about the data, it's not about the charts, it's ultimately what the client is trying to do with the business. Now, one thing I love in this world is Tableau. Of course, I don't love her as much as my Tableau as much as my family, but I've been working with Tableau for a long time. Just to give you some idea of my work around it. Actually, I started DecisionViz in 2012, and I've been a Tableau partner since then, so almost 10 years. Before that, starting in 2009, when there were about 75 people working at Tableau, I was running a project that at the time was Tableau's largest customer in the world, which was about 2,000 users, which of course, by today's standards is kind of small. But back then it was pretty huge. So I got involved with Tableau in a lot of different ways. I was on their customer advisory board. I ran 2 user groups, New Jersey and New York, for 8.5 years. And I was a Tableau ambassador for 4 years. So very involved with the company, and I'm still obviously involved with them in terms of being a partner, but I also teach Tableau, a course called Visual Analytics with Tableau at New York University. So I'm still very much tied in. And I want to just be able to give you some ideas today and some specific things you can do to help your visualizations tell that story better. So the things that I want to cover today, there's 3 ideas, and I think it's going to give you really a new aspect of how you look at data visualization, which is beyond just building the dashboards. And it really applies if you're an advanced dashboard designer or maybe even starting out with Tableau Creator. These are some things that could save you a lot of time and, more importantly, help you have more impact with your work. And I know maybe that sounds a bit dramatic in terms of that these are new ways to look at data visualization, but I've really seen it make a difference with my clients in terms of how it helps their companies ultimately, but it also helps their careers too. And I can never overemphasize this enough with people who are working in the world of Tableau, that it's become such an important element, even for people that are, whether they're hunting for jobs or looking to get promotions, the ability to work with data, and especially doing that with Tableau or other things like Natalie's involved with Alteryx, is really important. So what is it that I want to talk about today? So one, when it comes to analyzing visuals, you are not in charge. And I know that sounds strange, but and of course it's not exactly true. But what's important is that the visuals you create send what I like to think of as a direct message into your reader's brain. The second thing is that color has the ability to clarify, but it also has the ability to confuse. So we'll take a look at a couple case studies where we see how we can transform poor use of color to using it in a way that delivers a clear message. And the third is that the goal of creating dashboards is to help conduct an analysis and answer questions. But what I see is that many dashboards are set up in a way that go against how the audience is actually prepared to consume the information. And that's critical, is that it goes back to that first idea, is how do you go from the idea to the visual and get it into the reader's head so that they can consume it and use it. And I don't mean to sound negative by telling you these things. In fact, I'm going to show you some steps that you can take to avoid these problems and have more impact. The first thing I want to cover with you is, and you may have heard variations of this idea, is that as humans, we have the ability to recognize very complex patterns, and it happens in the blink of an eye. And here's something that I think will blow your mind. Every time I still think about it, it really is really a crazy idea. Here it is. Your brain is working on an image as soon as you see it. So in a way, you are thinking about what it means before using effort to think about it. So I'll let you soak that in for a second, because it's a little bit heavy. But what it actually means is that when you're showing an image in a way that you're not showing the information in a way that communicates the message, or you're showing it in a way that's confusing, it slows your reader down. It takes them longer to decipher the meaning. And a lot of times it might just cause them to ignore it and move on to something else, because people just want something that's easy to consume. And a lot of times they're just frankly lazy and they don't want to spend the energy on it. But if we can harness the brain's natural processing power, we can really get through and help our audience get through enormous amounts of information and get to what matters, which is making decisions and taking action. Now, I'll probably say that a few times today. That's what this is all about. Ultimately, you're trying to help people make decisions and take action. Everything else is just in support of that. The data is in support of that, the visualizations, the dashboards, all the technology. It's just to really help them do those things. So when you, as the author of these data stories, understand how the brain is interpreting these patterns, it's going to take you to a new way of thinking about using software like Tableau, because you won't just necessarily be clicking on the options and saying, I want to use this for size, or I'll make these colors. You're going to have a much deeper sense of how to use those and why you're using those for a particular situation, and help you make specific choices that are good for your audience. So what are these patterns that I'm talking about? There's many, but the two that I want to really get in with you today are very common when it comes to data visualization, and that is gradients and color. And maybe you didn't think about them as patterns until I mentioned it, but that's what your brain thinks. It thinks it's some kind of pattern that it has to decode. And really, when I say color today, I'm talking about two things. One is a gradient, which represents a measure, numbers, and usually it's different shades of a single color or shades of multiple colors. And the other is actually the term color, which is really single colors. And that's meant to represent a dimension. And those colors are things like blue, orange, red, green, yellow, what have you. And the problem is that when people talk about color, it's more generic, but it's really these two elements, and you have to be very specific about what they are because they're used in very specific ways. And the reason I want to talk about these with you today is that they're probably the most commonly used patterns when it comes to visualization, but they're also tend to be the most abused. So we really have to make sure that we can avoid that abuse. So what do I mean when I say abuse? Because that's a pretty strong word. Well, there's three things that we can focus on for today. One is that you just use too many gradients or colors. And when you do that, nothing stands out on the image because you don't really know what's important. If there's just a lot going on, nothing stands out in particular. The second is when you use the same gradient or color to represent more than one thing. And what's going on is it messes up your brain because your brain says, oh, I see blue and blue, they must be related. But that's not what's going on because they actually mean something different from what you're trying to convey, but the brain doesn't really know that. And the third is using color just when it's not needed. Because again, you see that, and as a reader, you think, oh, that color must mean something. It's important. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. But if it's not important, then it slows down the reading of the dashboard and interpreting what it means. So you have to be very careful. Now, I could list many other what I would call violations, but we don't have time to go into all those. And I really just wanted to be able to give you some practical tips on how to deal even with these three areas. So let's jump into the first case study. So here's something I actually pulled off of the Tableau website. And I found this interesting because the author obviously liked using this orange gradient and these particular greens colors. And the first problem with this, which you all may have already figured out, is there's no color legends. So of course, I have no idea what's going on here. But you probably are starting to think when you just read it without legends that, of course, if something is the same shade of orange, it must be related, and same with these greens. But then you've got the greens that are also in these headers. So there's kind of a lot going on here that is difficult to figure out. And then you've got the pie chart, which is also using some of the same shades of greens and oranges. And as I already mentioned, when you use color, it's to make your message stand out. And so the more colors you're using, it really gets confusing for your brain and for your message to get through. One idea that I just want to float out to you in general before we really get into the details of understanding how to improve this particular view is to really think about using a white background. As an opinion, I think it looks cleaner. The second reason, in this particular case, they were using a gray for the background. And when I'm working with Tableau, when I have information that's not necessarily important enough to color, I tend to use a neutral color like a gray. And so if you're using it for the background, you really shouldn't use it in your visual. So again, it's something that kind of limits my ability to work with color when I'm using in that way. So what I encourage you to do is just think about not using it. And I've seen lots of people use everything from grays to neon colors. You'll see a lot of this, especially if you are looking at Tableau public views. But remember, a lot of those are more like infographics and not necessarily the kind of analysis that you'd be doing inside your company. And so you wouldn't necessarily use those as a kind of comparison about the ways that you should use color. So just keep that in mind and give it a try. So the first thing I had to do here was add the color legends. And right away, I saw that there were some problems because while they're using the same gradient for the same measure, which is amount expended, you're using it on multiple charts, but all the ranges are different. So you can't use that for any kind of analysis because a dark orange on one isn't the same meaning as dark orange on another. So that's a huge problem. And then, as I already said, you're using some of those shades within the pie chart. So your brain is also kind of making some assumptions that maybe there's a relationship between that dark orange and the light orange with some of the dark orange and light orange that is used in the other places, because it's automatically trying to make those connections. So the first thing I wanted to tackle here when I thought about how I could reimagine this was the pie chart. And for a separate discussion, I'm just not a huge fan of pie charts anyway. Within Tableau, if you've used a pie chart, you know that it's very difficult to actually control the amount of real estate it takes up. So that's one reason I like to stay away from them, just because it limits the amount of space I have for other work. But in general, I'm not a fan of pie charts, and you'll see what kind of option we end up with here. So as I mentioned, if we're trying to reduce the color, if I do that, well, I end up with something like this, but it's not really that great because now I've got the borders to tell the slices apart, but it kind of loses its impact. So what's something else we could do? Well, instead of using size now for the size of the slice in the pie, we could do this and turn them into bars. And I think this is a huge improvement. Now, the other part about converting it to a bar chart is that I can sequence the information. So I can sort low to high or high to low. Whereas in the pie chart, it's not always apparent what that is. Of course, you can read the labels, but who wants to read labels? The point of using a visualization is to let that information get in really fast. Now, speaking about amounts of information, the other thing that's going on here is you may have noticed that on the labels for the pie chart, they've used all of the digits for the number. And that happens because in Tableau and most software, the default is to show all of the information. But really, when you think about it, if I showed this just with a single decimal point and turned it into millions, that's probably enough to help people out for how they want to use this for making a decision. So we can really clean it up. It takes up a lot less space, and it's a lot easier to understand the range of information as well, because I can see from about 250 million all the way to that 24, 25 million pretty easily. So now let's take a look at some of the other things that are going on here. One of the areas of a dashboard that I find doesn't get a lot of love is actually in the title. Maybe that's surprising to you, but the title of the page is really there to set the reader's expectations about everything else that's going on. But usually I see something like this. You get a logo and a very vague description about what this is. City spending could mean so many different things, especially depending on who is reading it, because it could be someone from finance. Maybe it's someone from product planning. It could be the CEO, and they all have different ideas about what they want to see out here. So I encourage you to be very specific and as detailed as you can, because it's going to help the reader think about the message that you want to communicate so that everything else they see on the page ties together. So the first thing I thought about when I looked at this is, well, everything seems to be about a very specific year. And so I want to keep that as part of the idea of what should go in the title, rather than having it to show up in every single title of each of the individual charts. And then I took a look at the whole dashboard and saw that this particular idea about how much money is being spent, well, that would be interesting to know maybe. And what about if I could just combine all these ideas, the year, the total amount, into a much clearer and specific heading, maybe something like this. So if I'm coming in and I read that, and it actually gives me a cue that I could change the year right there, right up front, it's pretty nice. So that's one simple adjustment. Now, the other nice thing is I just got rid of that big chunk of real estate and condensed it up into the title. So I'm going to be able to use that later on. So that's always a big consideration when you're working with images, is to give each one the maximum amount of space that you can. One other idea that you might have been exposed to working with visuals is that people read them either top to bottom or left to right. So for this one, I'm kind of keeping the same idea. I think left to right works pretty well. So this is the first chart that they're going to look at now, coming in from the left. And also because that's the first thing they're going to see, I thought that that would be the one we'd apply the gradient to if we could only pick one. The other thing that's interesting here is it's sorted alphabetically, which is kind of tough. Now, sometimes it makes sense to sort it alphabetically. You might have a specific reason, but typically people like to see information sorted high to low or low to high. And in this way to show the information, the other problem is that you have to scroll. And so now I'm not even sure where the highest value is. I have to go up and down, and also I might just miss it. I might make the wrong decision because I'm just doing it manually. But the great thing is I just opened up that space above it, and I could go with something like this. So I sort it high to low. I'm using the gradient. And now I can see how information is grouped. I can see there's a few values that are pretty high, and then the rest start to scale down pretty quickly and fall within the same amount of range. And I also don't need any scrolling. And of course, I put the legend there. So this is a pretty good option instead of that way of sorting it alphabetically. Again, a lot of times people sort information alphabetically because it's the default in Tableau, and they just say, okay, I'm happy with that. And they never think about what they're trying to get across or how people are going to interact with it. And they say, it's no big deal to scroll. I'll just leave it as is. So these are really important things to think about in terms of your user interaction, that user experience, and trying to make it as easy as possible for your user. And it only takes a few extra steps to do that. We've already talked about this pie chart. So now I can stick it in right there as a bar chart. You can see it's a lot more compact, but it's still easy to read. When I looked at this chart, it seemed that they wanted to show a trend because they're looking over time. And typically a trend is going to be better as a line chart. So I thought that'd be a better message. And I could just put that right in under the bar chart. So we've just opened up a huge amount of space for these last two pieces. And again, they're using gradients, but I've already used the gradient for the first chart, so I can't use it again. So I just end up with two simple bar charts using that neutral gray. And one of them I was able to fit in completely, and one of them just has too much information, so you're required to do some scrolling. Now, you might think that this looks boring. There's so much gray here. And if there was the case where there's certain information that you wanted to make stand out, maybe if something is above a certain value, and that's critical to know, you could make that a separate color. Maybe it could just be black, or it could be a blue. You could even make it one of, a darker shade of gray. But other than that, if it's just something where everything is kind of equally important, just leave it gray. It's not bad. Your goal here isn't to make it so beautiful. The goal is to get the information across quickly. So resist that urge. And one more thing I want to talk about is going back to this title, because I think there's one more thing that we could do here. And we really want to give away this one clear unifying idea. So the thing is that what I see a lot, and I mentioned this early on, is that the authors, the way we write, tends to go against how people are ready to consume the information. So what do I mean? Well, when you think about what happens when you create a dashboard, it's usually to answer a question, right? That's what you might even ask people that you work with. Well, what questions are you trying to answer? Yet what we tend to do is actually put our titles in the form of a statement, which goes against kind of the nature of what we're trying to actually do. So for the title here, we could turn it into a question that looks something like this. And now we're really specific. So I really like the way this one came out. I was really happy with this. But we don't just do it for the title. Each of the dashboard, each of the titles of our charts should get the same kind of treatment. So for example, on the first chart where it says money spent by department, how do we tune them in? How do we make them more engaged with the question? Something like this. How much did each department spend? Questions will create curiosity naturally. It makes your reader more interested to get into examining the data. Whereas if they just see this basic statement, money spent by department, they might just look at it quickly and not really think much about it. It's just how we are wired as people. So we should be taking advantage of that as authors to draw them in. And let's just look at one more example. So on this line chart where it says money spend by month, something simple, what is the monthly spending trend? Again, creates that just little bit of curiosity and investigation that will draw readers in to what we're trying to do. So while we're on the topic of questions and how to do it, because it's not necessarily something that we're used to doing, I actually created an ebook that helps you think about how to do this. So this is my one shameless plug, but it's really meant to help you on that transition from statements to questions by giving you some thought starters on how to do that. So actually, I'll put this into the chat later on so that you can actually, let's see if I can just do it quickly right now. Put this into the chat and you can grab it and download it later. So hopefully that will help you. But let's get back to the real stuff here. Another example that I pulled down, this one is, I think, really interesting as well. This was for some survey data. And I'm sure you're already getting the idea in your head. There's a lot going on. And in fact, these colors are similar, but have completely different meanings across all four of these. So this light blue means something different. The dark blue, the purples, all different stuff. So it's immediately really confusing because I'm looking at this saying, well, how do they tie together? And they don't. So I have to now study this and work at it to realize what is connected and what's not connected. And that defeats, again, the whole purpose of why we're using visualizations, to go quickly, help people get the ideas. I can't emphasize that enough. I think another thing that was going on, and this is just a sense that I got, is that person who authored this was trying to be cool because they used tree maps, they used these bubble charts, and those aren't as common. Now, maybe their audience was familiar with those and that was okay. But a lot of times when I see that, I think people are going for more something that looks cool instead of just using a bar chart or a line chart, when that would do because they want to mix it up so that doesn't look quote unquote boring. But again, the idea isn't to look cool. The goal is communication, right? Get your message across. So how do we tackle this one? Well, we've already talked about the pie chart, so I think you know where I'm going with this. Simple bar chart, neutral grays. And this bar chart, there's actually something going on here, which is a little bit nuanced. We talked about this idea of gradients, and here I've got a light blue and a dark blue, which makes me think that maybe there's some kind of relationship in terms of the values that are going on here, but it's not. In fact, if you recall, we said gradients are meant to be used for measures, but here they're using it for really a dimension. They're using a light blue and a dark blue for upstream and downstream. So it's really not the correct usage. So we could go with something like this. And I just chose red and blue, not for any particular reason. Other than I thought that it would work well. This bubble chart is kind of the same thing as a pie chart. Instead of the size of the slices, we can use that for using it on a bar instead of the bubbles. And then the last part is this tree map. And what really struck me is that the information in the tree map was geographic information. So I just thought, well, maybe we should just make it a map. And so we get something like this. And the ideas we've talked about here, when you actually start to understand how visualization, as I call it, is a language, it's much easier to create something like this than trying to find a chart that looks nice or going through Show Me and say, oh, I'll just use that one. And let's look at, again, how these colors came out. So this gradient I used, rather than the tree map, I chose this one because I found it worked really well to emphasize the ranges, because there's a lot of values that are kind of in the middle here in the teens. Then we've got some highs and some lows. And so this seemed to me to work very well, and kind of, instead of say a light color to a dark color, I wanted to emphasize the ranges and the middle segment here. And then for this upstream and downstream, again, we wanted unique colors instead of using that gradient. And that's all we needed here. We didn't need it overloaded with all those blues and purples and so on. And everything else could be this kind of nice neutral gray, because we don't really need to make those stand out in any particular way. So the last piece to tie this all together, you might have noticed that the original dashboard didn't even have a title. And maybe that was okay if the audience knew what they were looking at, but it could be kind of dangerous if that gets sent around and it gets to somebody who isn't exactly sure what it is. They might misinterpret it. So you should always, again, have some kind of title. And I thought this one was pretty specific and clear. If someone read it, they would know what's coming. And let's take a look at a couple of the other charts in here and see what we could do in terms of turning those into questions. So the first one is in the top right, it says respondents by revenue. What is the revenue distribution? Seems much more straightforward to me. And on the map, respondents by regional cluster is just kind of a mouthful and even a bit of a mindful. So where are the executives located seemed pretty simple to me to get the point across. So you don't have to be complicated. You don't have to use big words. Just keep it simple and straightforward is always your best strategy for making your titles. So to close this up, I'm hoping that you could have pulled at least one idea out of what we covered today and feel like you could do something with that. Put it into action. That's what I'm most concerned about. I don't want you to get hung up on getting everything perfect. I covered a lot of ideas today. And that's one of the things that's really good about Tableau is you can go in and make quick changes and see if you like it, see if it works for your audience. And if it doesn't, you can make that change to something else. So you can experiment a bit. So we talked about three things. One is, how do you help your reader's brain tune into your message? Thinking very clearly about that the idea should go right into their head. I like this idea of straight line from the page or the screen right into their brain. Making sure that you use color to focus attention, not to make it look cool, not to make it look colorful, but use it very purposefully. And the last one is this idea that questions are there to draw your reader in, to create engagement, to build their curiosity, to really think about each element that you're showing them. And then the titles of everything, especially the title of the page, brings the whole idea together for your audience. There's a lot of different ways you can get in touch with me if you want to. I mentioned early on, I have a YouTube channel where I interview folks from across various industries and different ways of working with data. So feel free to check that out. You can catch me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or of course on the DecisionViz website, or feel free to just shoot me an email directly, lee@decisionviz.com. So thanks so much for letting me have the opportunity to share some of these ideas with you. And again, I hope that you could take something that I talked about and use it right away. And now we can head on over to any questions that have come in.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Lee. Great presentation, some really practical ways to think about the visualizations that we're putting out into the wild and how our end users can better interact with them. Really appreciate the message today. Like Lee popped his ebook into the chat, so you've got a link there. Folks, if you got questions, either raise your hand or pop a note into the chat or question and answer. One of the panelists can bring you off mute if you'd like to ask it or ask it out loud. Any questions? Anyone have questions for Lee?
While we're waiting for that, I'll throw one out that I get a lot.
Yeah.
I mentioned it kind of in passing, but people want to know why I don't like pie charts.
Go for it.
So there's a lot of things. Well, the thing about number one is I disliked them so much. A few years ago, I wrote a 10-part blog series about why I don't like pie charts, which you can find out on the website. But I don't really like them because I think that there's easier ways to get information across, which is what I looked at, which is the bar chart. Even when you get down to, because people always say, well, what about if I just have 2 slices in the pie chart? And that could work. So if you have 2 slices and they're, say, different enough, that could be okay. Like if you have one that's, say, 70% and 30%, if you know there's always going to be such a dramatic difference between the two, you could do that. But the other side of that is, why even use a pie chart if it only has 2 values? If you want to know, say, how many people said yes and no. So if you know that there's a lot of people that said yes, you don't need to say 70% said yes and 30% said no. You can just say one or the other, depending on which one you want to emphasize, and just put a big 70% on the page and not even have to look at a visual. So yeah, you really have to think about the message rather than the data, because people say, oh, I have to show all the data. Not necessarily. Sometimes it gets in the way. And then other cases where if you have, say, 3 slices and they're all very close to each other, people still want to know which is the biggest one and which is the smallest one. So now I've got to read the labels and it takes me more time and I get aggravated. So something, again, simple as a bar chart, or maybe just using a single number rather than using both numbers if you only had to show 2, something like that. So those are a few of the reasons I'm not a fan. Other reasons I'm not a fan of pie charts and ways to deal with them as alternatives. No, so I see a couple of questions came in.
Yeah, so we've got a couple that are coming in. I'll kind of read them off for you. So the first that came in, I like the idea of keeping the visuals simple so brains can easily decipher them. However, is there a concern that you can make the visuals so unengaging, unexciting, boring that you fail to engage? If so, how do you fix this while keeping the dashboard straightforward? It's a good one. I've got a take on this too.
Yeah, I agree. So if everything is, say, let's go to the extreme, gray, what that in the way that I work with my clients, what that would mean is your world as it is this moment is okay, because I'm not showing you anything that needs to stand out in any particular way. So if I was to say, show this to the CEO of a company and they look at it and it's gray, to them, it should mean I'm in good shape. I actually don't need to do anything right now. There's nothing that I need to worry about in terms of making a decision on this, or even further thinking about what kind of action I would like to take. So the fact that it's kind of completely boring, if you want to think about it that way, is that I actually don't need to engage with it. I don't know if that sounds really strange to you, but my goal is actually to spend the least amount of time looking at the visual. That's how I think about it. Only to look at it more when it's necessary.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
You said you had a take on it too, so fire away.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So when I teach DecisionViz for our consultants that I work with, as well as for organizations that I've worked with in the past, I sort of differentiate. I think the point that you just made is exactly what I say when I'm talking about business dashboards. they should be a call to action or an assurance that there is nothing to worry about. Like you just said, like if nothing flashes, I'm going to go have my coffee. I'm going to go about my day and focus on other things. Something flashes, I'm going to address it. I am more partial to bespoke data viz when you're using more of the narrative format, right? The infographic style, right? Where you're trying to communicate a one-off. You're not trying to monitor. You're trying to make a point or illustrate a point and drive it home, right? When you're adding narrative to what you're trying to illustrate, I think that's a better place for bespoke visualization. Curious if you have a take there.
It all sounds great to me. And that's why I also made that point earlier about how a lot of times when people use really strong colors, it's on something you might see that's more of an infographic, which is what you're saying. It's kind of that one-off. They're trying to make a point. It's not something that's being used in business, right? Most of the stuff that we see out in public on something like Tableau Public, I'll just use that because for us, that's where most of us would see work going on from our colleagues. Someone who's doing something incredibly flashy on Tableau Public, you don't know what it looks like when they're doing their work. They may not be having Sankey diagrams and colorful, formulaic twirls on the screen. They might be doing some real straightforward, simple things when it comes to what they're doing on the job.
Yeah, the most aggressive I ever got was allowed to get at the banks was slope charts. That's as far as
boy. Hold on there.
It's as far as I can go.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's also part of it is that the challenge is what people will understand. So you might make something that you understand, right? You're the author. When you show it to the more, I would say, the broader public at work, in your workplace, if they're not familiar with that, not only having ever seen it, but how to interpret it, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that a lot of times people just don't think of. There's like, oh, I'll just click the button and make that chart and I understand it. So of course everybody else will. And that's a bad assumption.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a good answer. The next one that was framed up for you, Helly, any suggestions for creating a dashboard to compare year-over-year price increases without making it too busy? Would you suggest a simple bar chart? Currently, this person is using a dual axis with price and volume, as well as crosstabs referencing the information from the 2 years they're comparing, which looks like it would have some additional metrics. So I think the crux of it, best ways to highlight year-over-year price increases while keeping it relatively clean.
Yeah.
It depends, right?
Well, I have a year-over-year price increase or whatever kind of any kind of change. If you want to think of it, it's an average. It's kind of one number divided by another number, essentially. And the problem with those kinds of numbers is when you just show them by themselves, you lose a lot of the context. One of the pieces of context is you lose what the original numbers were, right? So two divided by 4 is 50%, right? And 100 divided by 200 is also 50%. So the change would be, say, the same, but I would probably be much more interested in the 100 to 200 kind of change, right? That would be much more significant. So when I do anything where there's any kind of change or a ratio, I tend to show, I think it's helpful to show the ratio itself and the components of the ratio. And sometimes even to show the trend of those values. When I say trend, just, change, what it was over time, because I might say, oh no, it went down 50% this month, but what if it went up 100% last month? And it wouldn't necessarily mean that things were completely tanking, right? It could be an aberration. It could be, something in the marketplace that happened to everybody and all my competition. And maybe I went down 50%, but my competition went down 75%. So taking things as kind of these individual points doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. So again, it goes back to, what do I need to make decisions? And that's the other thing about asking questions. Forming it as a question helps you think about the other angles that you need to tackle, rather than just thinking, I'm going to show year-over-year change, because then you're done. You're up, I showed the year-over-year change, but there's so much more underneath that to help you really understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a solid point. The other thing you have available to you in Tableau specifically are visualizations and tooltips that you can use effectively, where you can layer that level 2 information on to the main point you're looking to drive. A couple of that may actually lead into the next question we had here, Lee. Any advice on using actions on a dashboard to connect different visualizations on a page together rather than keeping a single view? And then I think the same person had another follow-up around long form versus multi-page.
Well,
that's a fun debate.
Yeah. Well, let me go in reverse. Just the idea of multi-page. So I again, because I approach this as a communications challenge, I think about this and to me that translates to a story, like a real, not a story like a movie with an arc and emotional roller coaster, but more like a story, right? I'm going to step through this. And so if you think back to probably even when you were a little kid and you learned to write a story, so what's the main idea? And your paragraphs have to talk about a main idea, and then your sentences all tie together, things like that. So I look at each page of a dashboard as telling a story, or part of a story. So one is not mixing parts of the story together, meaning don't jam a bunch of stuff on one page just because you can to save space, because we're in the electronic world now. It's not like you need to print it out on paper where it used to matter. So keeping an idea on each page. So going back to that idea of a title, right? The title should tell you what's on each page. So if you have stuff that doesn't tie back to the title of the page, it's confusing. So that's one reason to have multi-page, right? If you have multiple ideas to get across, you want to separate those out. Now, if you have an idea that's so big that it takes up 2 pages, either you have to decide, is it really one big idea? Is it two smaller ideas? Or does it just have to blend over to the next page? And then you have to decide what's most important in the order of telling that story, so that page 1 has the stuff that tells you, do I even need to go to page 2, right? If I'm reading the story and I'm like, this story is kind of boring right now, I don't need to read the rest of it. That's okay too. So you have to think about it in that order in terms of an approach. In terms of the original question, it says about connecting different visuals on a page. I'm not actually sure what you mean by keeping them as a single view.
Yeah, I think the context here, and please feel free, whoever submitted this one, to follow up. But I understood the context here to mean how hard should you try to create one single view versus breaking things out and having them work together?
I think I answered that one.
Yeah, I think so too. So whoever submitted that question, if that doesn't quite address what you're going for, do let us know. But I'll go ahead and kind of close that one out. A couple more, and then we'll turn it over to Natalie to tell us all about TC. I think this one might be a quick one. Oh, yep, does answer. Magnificent.
Okay.
What's a good way to get feedback on dashboard designs?
Oh, okay. Well, I could talk a really long time about this because it's a really important skill. But I'll break it down real simply. The first way is to do it as quickly as you can. What I mean is, give somebody a dashboard if you're working in this flow where doesn't necessarily have to be a finished product. Why do I say that? A lot of times what we do is we work on a dashboard and then we get the data correct. We even get the right charts in there, and then we spend a huge amount of time even just on the presentation side of it, I want to get my fonts right. I want to get the layout perfect. I want to, everything. And then I show it to somebody and they go, I don't like it. Change the colors, make the, whatever it is. And a lot of times when it's too polished like that, people focus on the polish and not the content as much. So first off, I'd say get it in front of them as soon as you think the data is correct, because when you show people data that's incorrect, that just goes off on a whole tangent and ruins the flow of what you want to do. But if you're sure your data is correct and you have an initial idea of how to go about that, show it to somebody. Ask what they think. Ask them to be super candid. Now, I say that because here's the flip side. If you show it to someone and they say, oh, it looks great, and they don't, and they just kind of nod their head and say, yeah, that's what I wanted, that's the worst possible thing they could say. I know you're probably thinking that's nuts. Why is that? Most of the time when they say that, they probably really haven't spent enough time thinking about it, or really they're not giving you solid feedback. And what's going to happen is you're going to walk away and go, great, Lee said it was exactly what he wanted. And you're going to go finish it. And I'm going to come back to me. And then I'm going to give you all my feedback. And you're going to think, what happened? He told me it was great. Now he's telling me it's not. And then you have to go all the way back and basically tear it down and start again. So so what do? If someone says it looks great to you, you say, oh, Lee, I appreciate that. Hey, you know what? A lot of times people kind of say that, but I'm just curious. I'm sure there's something on here that doesn't make sense to you, or is probably a little bit confusing. What is that? Really, really push them to tell you something that's bad. It's okay if they don't like something. You want to know now, not later. And it really ends up opening up really interesting conversations when you do that, because they absolutely are never going to expect you to encourage them to say something bad. They usually just think you're going to say, oh, great. So I hope that helps give you some
that's great
ideas about how to tackle that.
I think that's great advice, is really pushing for feedback. It is very tempting to fall into that trap of, well, they said everything's perfect, we're done here. Let me take these last two, and I'm going to kind of combine them since there's somewhat common theme.
Sure.
Part one on this, do you have a recommended approach for socializing dashboard elements for a charter view that is maybe more bespoke or they haven't seen before? So how do you incorporate elements that help the users orient themselves to a new chart? And then the second piece of that would be, how do you deal with such situations where maybe you're tied to corporate colors, primaries and secondaries, in a dashboard, rather than the right color for DecisionViz?
Okay.
That's a fun one at the banks, by the way. They're all curious about that.
Really, both of those are great questions. So the first one kind of goes back to the last thing we just talked about. If let's just say you have an idea and you want to introduce something that you think people might not be used to, the first thing would be just to show it to a few people, just to get their initial reaction, right? The second part of that is you're obviously never going to get to everybody, right? You'll get some initial ideas and thoughts about it. You could even go as far as to make a little video and explain what it means, because it's not about just showing it. You need to make sure they understand how to use it in the analysis. So it's one thing for them to look at it and say, oh, I see it's a tree map and I'm not scared of it. It's how do you use this in context of everything else that's going on? And that's the part that's ultimately more important. So I love making little videos, and then you could post a link. It could pop up right from the dashboard, or maybe it's if it's something that you send around to people, you could make it more of a marketing piece. Hey, everybody, we're relaunching the dashboards, and there's some new elements in there. We want you to watch this little video to get accustomed to what's in there. It's really going to explain how to use it in your work. I find that that's really helpful. I think that one of the things we tend to do is just put it out there and think that people are going to understand it, figure out how to use it, and that tends to be the worst thing. The second thing about the colors, I have some pretty strong opinions about this, but there's a caveat. So I think I'll give you the extreme example. I had a client that I started working with years ago, and they showed me what their work was, and everything was red. And I said, why is everything red? Oh, well, that's our corporate color. I said, okay, well, red is bad. A bat means bad usually when people see red. So maybe we should not do that. And that's a true story. And I say that to emphasize the idea that your corporate colors were chosen for a specific reason, maybe to give off a certain idea. It represents something about the company, or maybe they just chose some colors that, they think work well together. I don't know. But that doesn't mean that because they work well on the website or to represent the company, that they're good for visualizations. And I'm guessing that's what you meant by the right colors. And so I think that if you're feeling like you're forced into using the corporate colors, you need to really work with some kind of person internally, like maybe on the communications team, and say, hey, we need to come up with colors that we should use internally for visualization, so that that when people use them, they use them for similar meanings too. So that when they see blue, it tends to be meaning something about this, or when they see green or red. And that helps drive some common ideas that can be used throughout the company. But it's real dangerous just to say, I'm going to use corporate colors and think that it's going to work well. But I understand the frustration you might be feeling.
Yeah, that's been a challenging one, especially for the two larger banks in Charlotte. Both of them have red in their palette. One's red and gold,
Yeah.
one's red and blue.
Yeah.
But both have kind of put frameworks in that align DecisionViz into application design color choice palettes, if that makes sense. Meaning that you have to, so there's a lot of red is bad, blue is good at Bank of America, and I'm not sure what Wells is doing. So it's kind of a box that becomes a little dangerous.
Hey, this is Darrell. I can provide some context on that too. Also refer to your data visualization team. Typically your marketing team or people in branding have put something together specifically for DecisionViz. We've come a long way. And I know for both Wells and Bank of America, there are primary and secondary colors that they want you to use for titles, as well as some of the vizes, some of the colors they want you to use in your viz.
Yep, that's great, Darrell.
That's awesome.
Thanks for that. That kind of brings us to the end of the questions that we had in the chat. Really appreciate the engagement, everybody, and Lee for your very thoughtful answers. Just want to give everybody one more time. So Lee still got his information on the screen. If you connect with him through any or all of these channels, really appreciate you joining us today. Very thankful to you for taking some of your time and spending it with us.
Thank you.
So to wrap up our agenda here, very exciting. We're going to kick it over to Natalie, one of our new leaders. She's going to tell you a little bit about Tableau Conference, which again is going to be online this year. So Natalie's going to kind of orient you to what's going to be available to you and walk you through what to expect for TC here in a couple weeks. Take it away, Natalie.
So exciting. I do want to say thank you, Lee, for that content. That was so great. I can't wait to share the replay with my peers and my husband, who is now into dashboards. But I will say my golden rule is simply pies are for eating. So that is my rule. But anyway, so I'm here to talk about the Tableau Conference, TC21. It is happening this year. Only 18 more days. I mean, I am counting down. November 9th will be here before we know it. For any newbies on the call, you may be wondering, well, what is TC? TC is simply the best week of the year. So you definitely want to attend. TC is a jam-packed conference with fantastic opportunities to learn, connect, and celebrate Tableau and data. I'm pretty sure that's where I met Jeremy Poole officially at TC, even though we've both worked together. Again, TC is virtual this year, and it's 100% free, and absolutely everyone on this call can attend from around the entire globe. Once you register and as the event draws near, Tableau will be sending out an email with helpful information about what to do during the event, how to navigate the event platform, how to start planning your schedule, because there's over 300 sessions. That is insane. And over 50 phenomenal speakers. So Tableau is going to send you some great information that will also include guidance on conference content, brain dates, which I love, Slack, and Tableau doctor's appointments. So you can see here on the screen, this is on Tableau as well. I won't read it word for word. That's just, but I will say that there's a lot of attendees coming from over 7 different industries. So great way to connect and learn from others. And these are just a few additional highlights. I feel like I could talk about TC for hours upon hours, but I know we all have things we need to wrap up on Friday before the weekend. But again, it's free this year. Take advantage of it. There will be endless training and certification offerings. The sessions will be available on demand afterwards. Just make sure that you register. Phenomenal keynote speaker lineups. For example, Mark Nelson, several Olympian athletes. You have the ability to connect and chat with your data fam over Slack. So I will be on there. I will be looking for you all. And one of my favorite things about TC is the DecisionViz. If you don't know what that is, it's where 3 of the best come to battle on who can create the best viz, and I believe it's in like 20 minutes. It blows my mind every single year. So you definitely do not want to miss that. As well as Tableau doctor sessions. Those are great if you need help with something. And then also they have a musical guest, Beck, that will be appearing. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you register today. This is the link, tableau.com/TC21. So be sure to register. And I will close on what Jeremy mentioned earlier. He showed us our Charlotte Tableau user group page. Make sure that you do subscribe so that you can see the replays and you are aware of upcoming events. Before I close, any questions about TC? All right. Well, that wraps our session for today. Thank you everyone so much for joining, and special thanks to Lee for the excellent presentation. We will be posting this on our user group page, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.